I have a very quiet voice, so I'll try to speak up. Who? First of all, I heard today, and I didn't know this, but one of our former speakers passed away, and the funeral was Friday. I don't know that those of you know Malcolm Udaly. His service was Friday. Malcolm was wounded on a ship that was attacked by a kamikaze in World War II. And it just, you know, he was had a great story. I remember him talking about being on the ship and being allowed to get out of the infirmary just so that they could watch the sailors being pushed over, pushed overboard. But you know, just it reminds me that these times that we are together gives us an opportunity to cherish the lives of those that have sacrificed for our country. And some special thanks for Beth and Janet and team for all that they've done. It really was a big reason why Walt Schley from the Purple Heart Society said that the Heart of America, CAF, did such a nice job honoring us last year. If you have a chance, come back. And it's because of the warmth of this group, I think you should look at yourselves and know that all the effort of cleaning parking lot in the snow, we did that last year for this event, standing out in the cold to help people get to the elevator is meaningful. And so on behalf of myself, and I'm sure Brian as well, we thank you for all the work, the Purple Heart cakes, the purple tablecloths. 2020 has been a great start to the year. I thought the presentation last year was, or last month in January, 75th anniversary of D-Day, having our wing members talk about that experience, being there firsthand, was powerful. Next month we're going to have the 75th anniversary of Iwo Jima. And I've already got two of the three. Ed Boswell, who couldn't be here today. Martin Murphy's going to be here. Martin was in a tank on Iwo Jima. And we're going to make a special event, 75th anniversary of Iwo Jima. And then Tom was very kind, and we have in April a gentleman that served under Patton's Army. And I've never met him, but he was gracious enough to get us here to. And so he met with them yesterday or this morning for breakfast.
Had breakfast with him this morning.
Had breakfast with him, and if his health's good and he gave the thumbs up, he's going to be here in April. So we've got a great start to the month. And next week, for those of you that are interested, Colonel Shuey, who's here, and Trailside, another event that I do a speaker series for, they're going to have a documentary about his life. Colonel Shuey was a combat engineer. He ran a big program at NASA after the war, or after the Vietnam. And so he's going to have we're going to show his documentary over at Trailside if you're interested, see me afterwards. And then also, one of our wing members on February 25th, John Curtola, is speaking at the Central Library about Iwo Jima.
That's Kansas City Central.
At the Kansas City Central Library. So if you're interested in that, see me afterwards. I'll be happy to tell you about that. So, normally I do a little intro for our speaker. But we don't need to have an intro today because we've got some distinguished Purple Heart veterans to set the stage for our keynote speaker. So as I call your name, if you could come up to the front, do a little presentation. We'll finish off with our keynote speaker. We'll have the one big round of applause, and then we'll have Kira give her speech after that, and then we'll break for lunch. So on behalf of the Heart of America wing, we honor Ted Wakeman. And Ted served in the United States Army, Vietnam. He was wounded on August 20th, 1970 by RPG fired into his compound. He was awarded the Combat Infantry Badge, 3 Bronze Stars and Medal, Air Medal, 100 hours documented, the ARVN, Army of Vietnam, Bronze Star for Valor, and Vietnam Service Medals. On behalf of the Heart of America wing, we thank you, we honor you for your service, and we thank you for your sacrifice. Don't start on the cake yet. And full disclosure, as I was doing this, I didn't have everybody's bios, so some will be different for different things. So I hope you all give me some grace, the Purple Heart veterans. Glenn Leonard. Glenn was drafted in 1966, combat engineer, 25th Infantry Division, United States Army. South Vietnam at Cu Chi and Tay Minh base camps. He was wounded December 13th, 1967 in jungle ambush in French Fort area near Cambodia by automatic weapons and Claymore directional landmines. He was medevaced by helicopter to Bearcat and then on to Cu Chi, Cam Bay to Camp Zama, Japan, and then discharged in February '68. We thank you for your service. We thank you for your sacrifice. And today we honor you, Ben. His last line on his bio said, "Praise the Lord." This is a much better intro than I normally do. I just have live intro. Mel Carney and I have lunch on Fridays. His daughter Stacy's with him today. He has authored a book that he just spoke about at Trailside for us, Command at Dawn. And Mel had a pretty harrowing story. One of the stories that he talks about was Castle Hill, where 5 were lost to mortars, 27 were wounded and medevaced. And I remember what Mel said last year at this event. Mel said to me, he said, "You know, Dave, my Purple Heart was mailed to me. This is the first time I've been acknowledged for my Purple Heart." And that really meant a lot to me, and I think should mean a lot to our wing. So, Mel, we honor you. We thank you for your service. We thank you for your sacrifice. What a treat, Al Newland. His mom is a Rosie the River. I've lost where he is in the room. Oh, there's the hand in the back. He said to me as he walked in, "I thought you were going to call me this week." And I knew you'd remember. You got a better memory than I do. You know, one of the things that his feature, his documentary, it was done by Sean Wynn, who's here today. And I remember in the video, Al Newland's storytelling about how the doctor, when he finally got to the hospital where they treated him for his wounds, the doctor said, "You know, I can see your heart through the hole." And he was that close to death. Al has spoken to the wing before. He's a very gracious man, been very kind. He brought his mom and another Rosie the River to an event and to the event to the wing. And Al, we thank you, we honor you, and we thank you for your sacrifice to our country. Shirts. Got to see it twice. What was really interesting is after the doctor treated him and they could see his heart through the hole, then he went back into combat. I always thought that was a powerful story. I've been blessed to get to know Gary Derigny, and Gary's written a couple of books. I just finished, I haven't read the first one, I guess I'm reading them out of order, but he wrote a story called Angie's War. I don't know if you remember, but Gary spoke to our wing probably several years back when Ron was the speaker coordinator for our wing. And I remember sitting near the back I don't remember all of the story, but I remember him pausing and talking about how the dog had been killed in one of their dogs for their platoon, and say, I don't know why I'm crying now. And I was crying in the audience myself, hearing him talk about how he had lost over the years several men in his platoon. Gary served in the United States Army, Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Air Medal, Combat Infantry Badge, Vietnam Cross of Gallantry. Gary, we honor you, we thank you for your service, and we thank you for your sacrifice. Gary does with his book, one of the things that he does is he donates some of the proceeds to the homeless in Kansas City. He really has a mission to help homeless veterans. Well, I can't say his name pronounced correctly. He's already corrected me once this morning. So I'm just going to say Doc is in the house. Doc is a United States Marine. Richard Puska, U.S. Navy Corpsman. He served with the 1st Marine Regiment, Vietnam, 1967-68. Fought in the Battle of Hue City during the Tet of 68. He received the Purple Heart for wounds there and the Silver Star for heroism. This is his first time, to my knowledge, to the wing, and he walked in and he said, I think I have something for your museum. So, Doc, it's a pleasure to meet you. We honor you. We thank you for your service, and we thank you for your sacrifice.
Now a Hugh?
I can't pronounce it properly.
Wait.
We need a new speaker leader. It's Doc, right? George Befford, United States Marine, was wounded twice. First one was A Company, 1st Battalion, 26th Marine Regiment. The second was 234, Group 2, Unit 7, 4th Platoon, Combined Action Program, where he served in village, I'm not going to pronounce it correctly, thank you, with the Vietnamese and their popular forces. He was en route to set up an ambush and was hit by a booby trap. He, when he was here this morning, he was telling me that as he was wounded, he said they told him he was going to lose his leg. And fortunately, that did not happen, but it was that. We thank you for your service. We honor you today, and we thank you for your sacrifice to our country. The next gentleman and I have a lot in common. I don't know his real name. We call him Shorty around here. Larry Slavens served for the United States Navy. And it's a bizarre story. You heard it, if you were here last year, you heard him speak. He was part of the 6-Day War when Israel attacked the USS Liberty. And 3 out of every 4 on that ship were either wounded or killed. Larry came back not to parades, not to accolades, but told if he ever talked about it, he'd go to Leavenworth or worse. It's an honor to be able to honor you today, Larry, to thank you for your service, and thank you for your sacrifice to our country. I'm hoping I haven't forgotten. I've got some more to go, but if I don't have this perfect, I sure apologize. Our next veteran also is from the United States Navy. And Stephen was a quick friend of the wing. Stephen Woke was on the USS Pueblo. He was a prisoner of war. Stephen was wounded when the ship was attacked by the North Koreans. He was a previous speaker, and his story is documented on Patriot Features. But when he was and his shipmates were captured, it would be days before they would treat him for his wounds. He thought he was going to be left on a tablecloth and thrown overboard, but instead they just took him off and kept him in the tablecloth for days. They did surgeries without anesthesia, and today is a pleasure and a deep honor to be able to honor you, Stephen, to thank you for your service, and to thank you for your sacrifice to our country. We're going in, you can tell these guys keep getting younger. We're going to get to the Korean era now. Our Air Force representative for the Purple Hearts is also, he's really a gentleman. Dean Kling, and has got quite a story. He's previous speaker to the wing. I don't know if you remember his story, but when his plane was hit by the North Koreans, he was in the plane and he had just read about somebody else that made it back in their plane, and he didn't want to have to ditch it, but doggone it, the plane was on fire inside the cockpit, as I recall. And he decided he had to eject. He had to hide, and he was wounded. Dean has come as a guest many times to our wing, and today it's an honor to just be able to honor you, to thank you for your service to our country, thank you for your sacrifice, not only in Korea, but in Vietnam, and today we thank you. We don't have enough insurance in the wing. No.
You think I couldn't stand up?
Oh, I knew you could stand up.
Where do I go? Right here?
Yeah.
Right spot.
We had the pleasure of having a friend of the wing for a long time, Max DeWeese, the United States Marine. What many of you know from Max's story, who turns 99 the day after our next meeting in March. Max was on the first offensive land battle against the Japanese in World War II. In addition to Guadalcanal, he was at Saipan, Tarawa, and Tinian. Max is not only a Marine, but Max has been a friend of the community. He still delivers Meals on Wheels. He still goes and talks about honoring our country to schools, to patriotic events. And I've already asked him, and he's already committed to speak when he turns 100. Right. Max, it's an honor to have the opportunity to honor you. Thank you for your service, and to thank you for your sacrifice to our country. Down front?
Get a chair.
All right, we're going to bring up our keynote, but then we're going to do a little presentation with Brian and Beth. And bring up. You're a part of it.
I got it.
Beth's getting her part of it. All right. A new friend of the wing, who will be our speaker after we do this presentation today, is Kira Torkelson. And some of the things that you don't know behind the scenes when you're getting speakers is sometimes you get a text that says, I just broke my eardrum. I don't know if I, and yesterday she said, but I'll be there. No worries. Kira was wounded twice at the Fort Hood shooting. And that was just a little over 10 years ago. She served at that time in the United States Army. And I think you're going to enjoy her story. I don't want to steal from it. I've been doing a little bit of reading. But Kira, today it's a deep pleasure to be able to honor you, to thank you for your service, and thank you for your sacrifice to our country. We've got a little presentation for each of you.
Amongst all these brave men, and I'm sure all these brave men and women out here, so I'm going to try to talk loud. Like you said yesterday, I found out that I had an ear infection and bursted my eardrum. So it doesn't hurt, it's just very clogged on this side. But I will do my best. So if you need me to talk louder in the back, just, I don't know, tell me to talk louder. I'm good? All right. So I'm Kira Torkelson. I was born in Kansas City, Missouri. I was raised all over the place, but I ended up graduating high school from Olathe South. I joined the military right after high school, and it was kind of go to Army, go to jail for me. And I was a wild one, so I decided to join the Army. I knew I needed the discipline if I wanted to go to college. I knew that I needed some discipline first, so I would go to college and go to class and maybe not party too much. So I joined the Army Reserves. I went to Fort Jackson, South Carolina for basic training, and I loved basic training. It was really hard, but I don't know. I loved pushing my body and just seeing what I could do. I came home and was in the reserves for a couple of years, and then I met my husband. He came down to watch the Twins play the Royals, and I was actually his waitress. And I moved up to Minnesota with him shortly after that, and then I got deployment orders to deploy to Iraq. Like every good soldier, I went and got married. That's how we all do, right? With a little bit of extra money. So we got married, a quick wedding in Vegas, and then I went on to training to California to do training to prepare for our deployment. And then we were just gotten to Fort Hood. It was the second day that we had been there. And we were at the SRP site. Has anyone been to Fort Hood? They have a mini dome there now where you do the paperwork to get deployed. And there were rows of chairs, and I was almost to the front. It was almost my time to see the doc. And they told me I had to go back down to the other building. And I was like, gosh dang it, why? So I went down, come back. All the chairs are full at this point. My friend gives me his chair. He's a foot taller than me, which you'll see is important here in a minute. But I go up to this soldier, and I'm like, hey, it was almost my turn. Now I'm at the back of the line. And he's like, I'm just a puppet on the strings. But I remember looking past him and seeing someone in the corner. And I was like, that's just, it seems off. It was weird to me. But I was a specialist, so I went and sat down and minded my own business. And shortly after that, a man, the same man that was sitting in the corner, jumped up and shouted Allah Akbar, and he started shooting directly into the crowd that I was in. I was in the fourth row, and pretty instantly I felt a stinging sensation on the top of my head. I almost stood up and was like, hey, time out, your rubber bullet hit me. You know, we had done rubber bullet training, and I thought it was fake. I was like, surely this can't be real. This isn't happening right now. And I quickly realized that this was real, this blood was real, and I started crawling on the floor. I pulled out my phone, and all I could think of was I just wanted to send everyone a message and say I love you, because I thought I was going to die. I called 911 instead and just put my phone down by my side, and I started crawling. I had people trying to hide underneath me. I don't provide much coverage, but they were trying. Everyone, I mean, you never know what's going to happen. You know, if that fight or flight kicks in, people freeze, people you know, run. It was just mass chaos, and I just knew I had to get out of there. I saw Captain Gaffney, which was a officer in my unit, charge the shooter with a chair. Right prior to him doing that, I was on the ground and I looked behind me, and the shooter was shooting people on the ground, and I was just waiting for him to keep raising his gun until he shot me again. When Captain Gaffney charged him with a chair, it gave me the opportunity to get up and run, and he graciously gave his life at that point. I got up and I ran. This room had a bunch of cubicle walls, or like cubicle offices in it, so I ran around those, and everyone's like, sit down, sit down. I'm sure they were terrified because my face is covered in blood at this point. But I was like, no, I'm not sitting down. Like, we have no idea what's going on, and I just wanted to get out of there. At this point, I later learned my friend Dana, who I had just met, she actually had to go down to that other building with me, and we bonded over our Jimmy Dean meal that the Army so graciously gave us, little Vienna sausages. And I had just met her. She was going to be with my unit. She was shot in her arm, and she was frozen. And when I got up and ran, she actually saw me, and that's what gave her the ability to move. She was also shot in her leg, and the bullet went up through her uterus, through her fallopian tubes, into her abdomen. And the only reason why she survived is because when she was born with all her organs on the outside of her body, and how they put them back in is different than how ours are arranged. So that's pretty incredible, and she has a 7-month-old baby now. I just got to go see him over Christmas. But back to my story. So I'm a little bit vertically challenged. I couldn't see over the cubicle walls. So I saw my sergeant, and I grabbed the back of his jacket, and I was just following him every which way he went because he was watching the shooter. And then the shooter's gun jammed, and we ran out the front door that he started shooting from. He was going through the building just shooting anyone that he could. At this point, I went behind a car and I grabbed the captain, and I told her, I was like, come on, we have to go, we gotta keep getting out of here. We ran behind a Connex, and then I thought there was a big forest, and I was like, let's go this way. And it's a good thing we didn't, because there were like 5 trees and then a softball field. But instead we turned and we went in a building, and they actually wouldn't let us in. The civilians wouldn't let us in. They're terrified. You know, all we know is a soldier is shooting and killing people. And finally, I think my sergeant had gotten in there, and he pushed them out of the way and let us come in. And at that point, I realized I had been shot in my back as well. So I pulled my jacket off, and another soldier pulled the bullet out. It didn't go in very far. Both of my wounds were very superficial, an inch either way, and it would have been detrimental for me. So after this, we sit on the curb and we wait. I'm in shock, but I can talk and I'm able to sit up. So we wait for the ambulance. It's a mass casualty. No one knows what's going on. I finally get in an ambulance and I get taken out. And then I finally get another ambulance, and it goes for just a few feet. And then I hear a soldier turn around and say, which way's the hospital? It was the same soldier from my unit that pulled the bullet out of my back, jumped in the ambulance, because she's like, I'm getting out of here. I don't care if I have to drive this ambulance out of here. And the EMT was like, what are you doing? And so he got out and drove the ambulance to the hospital. And I was sat in the hallway for a while, which was fine with me. I was able, I didn't need aid like a lot of people did. And I ended up getting treated on the gynecology ward. At one point, a nurse was like, you'll be okay, and patted the top of my head. And I was like, ow. I never actually checked that wound. So I was released to duty that night. We got put in a room with some other people that had been injured, and this guy was like, I got pain pills and sleeping pills. I was like, I didn't get anything. I was like, I want pain pills and sleeping pills. So I went back and I got those. And then we went back to North Fort Hood, which is on the other side of Fort Hood. And I went back to training for 2 weeks. They had a little tiny first aid station where I would go every other day and they would repack the wound on my back. And then 2 weeks after the shooting, they decided to pull all 4 of my wisdom teeth. And someone there was like, wait, you got shot at the shooting? No, you're going to the warrior transition unit. I was like, what do you mean? I'm deploying with my unit. I'm ready now. You guys can't send me back to duty for 2 weeks. But she ended up pulling me and I didn't get to go with my unit. They kept telling me I'd catch up, I'd get to go, and I was never actually able to catch up with my unit. 6 weeks after the shooting, I got to go home on convalescent leave, and I went to a civilian doctor because the army docs had told me to just keep pushing on my head. It was pussing, it was gross. No, just keep pushing on it, it'll be fine. And I get to the civilian doctor and she goes, oh, I see something shiny, and she grabs a scalpel and cuts my head and pulled out a bullet fragment out of the top of my head. I didn't tell the army I kept it because I knew they'd take it, and I was like, I didn't get the other bullet that was in my back, I'm keeping this. It's a little tiny fragment. After this, I go back to Fort Hood until February, and excuse me. It's probably where I got the ear infection from. So after this, I returned to duty. I returned to my reserve unit, and then they sent me to Fort Riley. You know, we just didn't get the best care. It was, which I am sure a lot of you maybe have experienced in the military. After that, there's also a lot of politics that went along with that, with this shooting being workplace violence. Nadal Hassan was the shooter. He was a major at the time. He was a psychiatrist that was supposed to deploy with my unit. I was in a combat stress unit, so had it happened at Fort Hood or it would have happened in Iraq. He said he didn't want to kill his people, is what he had said. He was actually also already being tracked by the FBI. They have a giant book this big called The Ticking Time Bomb. They knew he was talking to Anwar al-Awlaki, which was our #1 terrorist at the time. And they just kept scooting him along, you know, and no one wanted to mess with political correctness. He was giving PowerPoints that were pretty shocking that people really should have picked up on and not had just kept sending him to the next place. So I went back and I testified against him twice for his article. I've been out of the Army too long. Was it Article 15? And then the other one. And the second trial, he fired his attorneys and represented himself. It was very pitiful. He wouldn't talk to anyone. He wouldn't shave. It was just a mockery. It felt like. He did get the death penalty. It hasn't been carried out since 1961, so he's hanging out over at Leavenworth right now. So if anyone wants to go say hi, that's where he's at. I actually spoke to a bunch of Army docs and nurses at the Munson Army Ball in December, and a lot of them actually have to take care of him. So that was interesting. 5 years after this shooting, after a lot of work, I was awarded the Purple Heart. We had to really petition for that because since it was stateside, we were not eligible. They did make an exception. We got it down in Fort Hood, Texas. President Obama, we had met him after the shooting happened, and he said he would take care of us, which ended up being a lie. And then not to get into politics, but he was actually,
a good soundbite.
He was actually at a music festival when we were awarded our Purple Hearts in Texas, but he did not come to award those to us. Wow. And then Texas awarded us a Purple Heart because Texas has their own everything. So once again, President Obama was in Texas. I'm not for sure what he was there for at that point, but he also didn't come to that award ceremony either. Ross Perot was actually pretty amazing in my healing process. I wasn't getting help by the military, and Ross Perot flew my mom up to Minnesota and then sent me to the Mayo Clinic. And when he didn't get the answers he liked there, he flew us to Texas to get answers from his doctors. That man was amazing. Rest his soul, because he just passed away recently, but he was very helpful and very kind to me. He's got a great museum of all sorts of things down in Texas. So after I returned, I got in a unit in Minnesota, and they asked me if I wanted to be medically retired out of the military. At this point, I had just had my son, and I couldn't imagine leaving him, and I was also like 23 years old, and I was like, sure, I'll take a medical retirement. My unit at the time was also really awful to me, and shortly, med board took 2 years, and right at the end I get switched to a new unit, and they were incredible, and I was like, wait, I remember why I was in the Army, I love it, can I stay? And they're like, oh no, you're out of here. So unfortunately they promoted me to sergeant, and then they medically retired me in 2013. In 2014 I had my second son, Colby, so I have an almost 8-year-old, he'll be 8 on February 29th, and then a 5-year-old. We moved back down here. I actually live in Baldwin City, Kansas, so not very far from here. And I had Colby 3 days after we moved in here. Way better here than Minnesota, so this cold is nothing compared to there. Shortly, let's see, probably 6 years ago, the military just kept pumping me full of medications. I had chronic daily headaches, back spasms, PTSD, on top of just being very irritable, very angry, and very depressed. And they had me on 9 different medications, one of which, this medication they're giving me for headaches, could cause migraines. And it just seems so counterproductive to me. And so they sent me to a chiropractor, and they were using essential oils, and she put them on me. And so I kept using them, and I eventually pushed out all of my medication. I use all plant-based medication, so it's exercising, eating healthy, lots of essential oils, so if you smell me, that's why. Especially I'm trying to get this ear thing cleared up, so I have lots of different smells going on right now. Maybe not the best ones, but they're helping. Better than the oregano. I could smell like pizza. Save that one for later. When I get home, that's how I'm gonna smell it. Yeah, so I don't have notes, as you can see. I mean, it's my story, so I'm going to open it up for questions, and usually that can help lead me into other stories that I might have missed. Yes?
So can you tell the number of people that were killed and wounded so people have some perspective?
Yes.
Yeah.
That would be very helpful, right? So 13 people were killed. We like to say 14 because one woman was pregnant. It was actually heartbreaking because she screamed my baby the whole time during the shooting. 32 people were wounded. He was eventually taken down by some MP officers because you know that none of us are allowed to have weapons on military base. And even if you do have weapons, because I think we were going to get our weapons, but we don't have ammo or anything. Could have used it as like so Officer Munley was a female officer, and she engaged in direct fire with him, and both of their weapons jammed at the same time, and they were both down on the ground. And then Officer Todd came and was able to subdue Hassan. I'm pretty sure he's still paralyzed from the waist down. So, yeah. Yes?
How did Ross Perot end up getting involved?
You know, I am not for sure. So I think he got involved with another soldier, Patrick Ziegler. He lost 20% of his brain. He had a pretty bad TBI. And I think he was helping him. And then he reached out to a lot of us since we weren't getting taken care of. We were returned back to duty, and it was really weird because the military just didn't want to acknowledge what had happened. So they just kept kind of pushing us all off. We all really had to fight for our medical treatment. A lot of us had to go to civilian doctors and pay for that out of pocket. So Ross Perot, that's where he came in. with his big bucks and he's really able to help.
If you haven't read his book on Wings of Eagles, it's an incredible story.
Oh, I will check that out. When I went to his office, he's got bronze statues of his grandchildren lining this into his office, and he has a whole museum with relics and, you know, a stick that was just amazing. The guy has a lot of really cool stuff. If you guys ever go to his museum down there. Any other? Yes.
When they finally acknowledged you guys and gave you Purple Hearts, is that still legally workplace violence, or did they change the description of it to terrorist attack?
It's permanently, like the town of Florida, they actually got Purple Hearts, because after that, they attacked by terrorists here.
So legally now it's a terrorist
You are
attack.
on the Purple Heart, yeah.
Yeah. So they changed that law, so other cities can get that benefit as well.
There was no question he was an enemy.
What's that?
There was no question he was an enemy.
Yeah, right? Well, but officially, and to not make the Army look bad,
There's too much political correctness.
there is. Well, now they let people wear hijabs and things in the military. Yes.
Yeah, well, your story really brings salient information that, commercial announcement here. You really ought to think about organizations like Disabled Veterans and Wounded Warrior. Great organizations, and they fill those gaps that you were talking about.
They do. So I am a part of a lot of veterans organizations now, Wounded Warrior Project, which I hate to bring up because I know it's post 9/11, or post 9/11 veterans, but they've been nothing but amazing for me. I know they had a bad rap a couple years ago, some bad publicity paying their people, but I mean, if they're working hard, they might as well get paid. But they've done nothing but amazing things for me and my family. They've sent my husband to a male caregivers retreat since he wasn't in the military. He's a volunteer firefighter now, so he's got a little bit of the service background, but having to take care of me is probably pretty hard for him. I mean, being a feisty woman as it is, and then having PTSD and everything else on top of it, so hats off to him. Yes.
Two things. One, Wounded Warriors is an excellent program now, you know, and I do volunteer with them. But yet, most of the veteran organizations raising money for veterans are post 9/11 now. So that Vietnam and Korea veterans do not qualify, you know, like Wounded Warriors, Gary Sinise. So you have to, you know, if you want to give money to things like that, you know, you got to really look at it. And as a sidebar, your major ended up at George White Hospital. A friend of mine was a trauma surgeon
Oh yeah, I like this story.
and a patriot, yeah. And they got him in through triage, got him into the operating room, and are all ready to operate on him, and he was paralyzed at the time and had 2 bullets in his spine. And this friend of mine, we called him Wild Bill, he looked at all the guys and gals in the operating room and suggested that they all go have a donut on break. And they left him laying on that table for about 40 minutes. Came back, and unfortunately he was still alive, so they operated on him. But there were some patriot medical people there helping him.
Now, like when you were shot in the head, you went to the hospital, you actually have blood in your hair.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't understand, like I told you at our chapter meeting, over 50 years, Army doctors and nurses have not changed. Because when I got hit the second time, it took about 4 hours for me to get evacuated to the hospital. When I went to Japan to be recuperated, the head surgeon looked at my lower right leg, he says, "What hospital?" I told him, "Doc, what the hell?" I says, "I went to the Naval Hospital, not the Army." He said, "Sometimes they send you there." I said, "Why?" He actually said, "If you went to the Army hospital, you would have actually lost your lower leg, they would have cut it off. You still might lose it." And, you know, they still haven't changed. You got blood, why did they check top of your head? You got blood, I mean, your back, head, blood's not gonna come up here.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and it was a lot. I mean,
And in
it
your
was
face.
matted and it was pretty bad. Yeah.
I was grateful I went to the Naval Hospital.
Maybe one more question?
Yes, sir, I have a question. You know, I have PTSD as well, right? Okay, and I got a whole bunch of other stuff. But there's 2 doctors in the VA system. Are you in the VA health system?
Yes.
you need to put a consult into Dr. Haas at Fort Leavenworth. She has a 12-week session on anger management. She's the best one I've ever had. And I'm in a group with Dr. Higgins in Topeka. It's every Thursday, and he's just totally awesome too. So, you know, these are, I mean, I've seen all kinds of psychologists and psychiatrists and all them stuff, but them two have really helped me.
So there's also a PTSD program in Parkville, Missouri called The Battle Within and or Warriors Ascent. There's two of them. They kind of came apart. They're both really great organizations. They're open to veterans of any era and first responders, nurses, and then sometimes also spouses can go through as well. So then you both get the tools and you can help each other. It's a 5-day program, holistic healing. So you talk about meditation and how that can help your amygdala, reduce the size of your amygdala, which gets bigger with exposure to stressful situations. And I went through that program and it was very helpful for me. We talk about yoga and clean eating and things like that. I have cards if anyone wants them, and I'll be around too if you have any more questions.
She's going to join us for lunch, but before we do, our wing leader, Brian Von Beveren, wants to have a special presentation to you. So thank you for being
We
here.
appreciate you coming out and sharing your story. I know it's not the funnest thing to talk about, and when someone's a good friend of the wing, we like to award them a challenge coin to let you know you're part of the group. So thank you very much for coming out and speaking with us, and I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you.